I'm Meliz and we're going to make some cookbus chili today. Now, I know we can all go to Yashal Halim or to the TFC to get churek, but honestly there is nothing nicer than homemade bread, especially when it's homemade churek, and the smells coming out of the kitchen are absolutely amazing. It's perfect as gabira as well if you're going to have it for breakfast and you want to toast it, but fresh out of the oven with a bit of hummus or jajak or whatever you want it with is absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to show you, go through the ingredients, and then we're going to go through the stages. So you can cook along with me kind of at the start, but then obviously there's time where the bread will need to prove, so it'll need to wait so it rises, and then it will be shaped and then proved again before it goes into the oven. But I'll talk you through all those different methods as I go along the video. So if we start with the ingredients, I've got 500 grams of strong white bread flour. It's really important, and some people kind of say, oh, you can substitute for plain flour. When it comes to lovely, light, fluffy bread, I mean, unless you've got village flour, which you can also use, this is the best thing to use for this bread. It's lovely and light and fluffy, and it just makes the bread lovely and soft with that lovely crusty exterior as well. So strong white bread flour, there's 500 grams there. I've got 100 millilitres of lukewarm water and 225 millilitres of lukewarm milk. If I'm honest, I kind of put some boiling water from the kettle in there, top it up with cold water to 100 millilitres, and then top it up with the cold milk, and that's still warm in there, so that's absolutely fine. I've put a little drizzle of olive oil in there as well, and I'm going to add, I use dry action yeast. This is the easiest thing to use really. So I'll just pop that in there, let that kind of dissolve and ferment a little bit before we're going to add it to the flour. And the other ingredients I use ground cinnamon and ground cloves. And the last thing that we'll need, once we're going to brush, once the bread is proved, we're going to brush it with a mixture of water, milk and flour. Once you've brushed it, you're going to obviously put all the lovely seeds on top that are going to brown and crisp up and give it that lovely churek flavour. So I've got 4 tablespoons of sesame seeds, I've got 1 teaspoon of churek or nigella seeds, and I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of anna seed here as well. So that's for later. I've prepped it just so you can all see. So the first thing I'm going to do is, while all the ingredients are waiting here, I'm just going to add the yeast to the milk, oil and water mixture. And I've also got in with the flour, I've got 1.5 teaspoons of salt in here, and I've also got about 3/4 teaspoon of sugar. I mean, you can add a little bit more sugar if you want to, but I don't want it to be too sweet. You've got the spices, the cinnamon actually kind of sweetens it up anyway. So just give the flour a little mix with the sugar and the salt in there to dissolve it, and then make a little well in the centre, and then give that yeast just a few minutes in the jug to just kind of dissolve into the liquid mixture. And then we're going to add everything to the flour, and we're going to knead it together to get it to that first stage where it needs to sit in a nice kind of room temperature, covered in the bowl, so that it proves and it doubles in size, ready for the shaping. Okay, so make sure you've got some nice clean hands and remove any rings or anything from your hands. It's much easier to work with if you don't have anything kind of getting stuck into that dough, and a lot more hygienic obviously as well. So just going to add the spices to the flour and sugar and salt mixture. So just going to add those in rather than dissolving them in the liquid, because they are the kind of dry ingredients. So try and get that all in. So that's the cinnamon and the ground cloves. And I've put all the Turkish equivalents for the names, as you can see on the side there as well. So the Turkish ingredients, I thought would be easier, rather than saying both ingredients together, that you've got those written out as well. So just make a well in the centre here, you can see. And then we're going to gradually just add the liquid ingredients. You can keep using your fork for the time being, but obviously you will have to get your hands stuck in sooner rather than later. So kind of start to bring it all together with the fork, and then get ready to tuck in. And you may need a bit of flour on your counter when you start kind of bringing it together, but you can judge that. It depends on the temperature, if I'm quite honest. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, so the temperature can have a real effect on how the dough comes together. I can already see this looks like it should be absolutely fine, and you shouldn't need any extra, but just keep giving it a good mix, see how you get on. You also don't want a really, really dry dough, because if your dough is really, really dry, then that kind of won't give you a lovely, light, fluffy bread, which is what we're looking for here as well. Just, you know, bear that in mind. The texture of traditional nohutlu çörek is slightly different. This is a lovely, light version of çörek as well. So I'm just gonna take this all off my fingers and then start to bring it all together. You can do it in the bowl, but I find it much easier to knead on the surface. And as I was saying, you probably won't need any more flour. I can already see it kind of coming together. But just judge it, just don't ever add too much. Don't drown your worktop in flour because you feel like the dough is sticking. It's sticking more to my hands than anything at the moment, so just get that off, which is why I said no jewellery, obviously. So just give that a good knead now. And this is going to need, you can do this in a stand mixer. Obviously I should have said, but I'm being really traditional today and doing it like this, but you can absolutely put it in a stand mixer if you've got one of those, and kind of knead it in there for 10 minutes, or you can do it like this by hand, the old school traditional way, either in the bowl or just like I said on here. It needs a good kneading to activate the gluten in the flour, and so the yeast also comes together with all of those ingredients as well, and then that's what will make it rise on that first prove. Then we'll shape it, put the seeds on it, and then let it prove again. This is a good old workout for about 10 minutes. Okay, so just make sure after you've been kneading about 10 minutes or so, kind of slap it down to get a nice smooth finish to the dough. Like this a few times, and then you're going to tuck it under like that. You've got a nice smooth ball like this, and then just put a little bit of olive oil. You can either put it on your hands, put it in the bowl, but I'm just going to put it in my hands and rub it over the dough, and then I'm going to pop the dough back into the bowl that the flour was in. You can use a clean bowl, but who's got time for that? Let's limit the washing up. So we just cover the dough with olive oil, bring your bowl back here, pop that in there. I'm going to cover that with cling film, and then we're going to let that prove for about an hour. Okay, so after about an hour or so, your dough should have doubled in size. What we need to do is just punch it down a bit to just let the air out, because you can see all the bubbles forming here. I'm going to let it prove again, so just punch it down a little bit, not too much, and then just kind of roll it over into this kind of long sausage type shape. Okay, you can see those lovely bubbles forming. So if I just put this down, you can see, here you go. So just, and very, very old school, I'm using a little side plate. My mum always uses a side plate, but if you've got a pastry cutter, then obviously that's absolutely fine. You need to cut all the way through. And it depends, you know, how thick you want your pieces of cheddar. I normally go for about 8 pieces. You know, but it's totally up to you. This makes a big loaf. I do have a recipe which is just slightly different quantities, which makes 2 loaves, but we like the big loaves at home, so I do find that this is the kind of way we do it. So just, I'm going to do a couple more, and then one more here, right at the end. We used to fight for the little end piece as kids, but now as I've got older, I actually like the doughy bit inside much more. So that's done. So what you do then is push it all back together, and what will happen is when it proves for the second time, these kind of gaps in between, these will start to open up a little bit more, and that's where you get that lovely cheddar shape, where you can actually pull the pieces of the cheddar apart. So give it another little shape. Okay, and I've got my seeds all mixed up and ready in the tray here. So I'm going to brush it, and the trick with the cheddar as well is to dip it on both sides. So you want seeds on the top and the underside of the cheddar as well. So just give it a brush with that flour, milk and water mixture. So un, süt and su, nice and simple. So a bit more flour than you have of water and milk. Give it all a good brush, and when it's in the tray, and I'll kind of carefully lift it up, you kind of need to tuck your hands under, then dip it inside here, like that. And then what you need to do is give it a good coating. Gently kind of turn it over and give the Turek a really good coating on both sides. All of the seeds really should go. So they should all go on the Turek. A nice little tuck. If you want it kind of slightly fatter, slightly longer, you can shape it accordingly. But give it a good little kind of pat of all the seed. If you dare flip it over again, all the seeds should be gone. But just if you get everything kind of under it there, pretty much all of it. Tray lined with baking paper, and I find it much easier to cook the bread and bake the bread. So as you can see already, and this might move, the bits that we cut have stuck back together, but they're slightly apart, and that's exactly what you want, so that they have that separation when they cook as well. So don't squish it too close together, basically. Give it some room. And now it's going to rest for about another 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll be ready to bake it. Okay, so the Turek is now ready for the oven. It's brewed for the second time, so it's nice and puffy and risen. And when you pop the tray in the oven, you also need to gently just throw in a little bit of water, cold water, at the bottom of the oven. Okay, not on the bread, obviously, just at the bottom of the oven, and quickly close the oven door so that generates steam, which will help the bread rise. It will create a lovely crust on the bread. It takes about 25 minutes to 30 minutes for it to cook, but all ovens vary, so just keep an eye on it.